Dad, do you really think Mom's boss sees you as competition? He probably sees you as staff. My son didn't even look up when he said it, just casually shoveled another forkful of mashed potatoes into his mouth, like he was reading a meme off his phone. My hand paused mid-carve, the steak knife digging slightly into the cutting board. The sound it made wasn't dramatic, just a dull, gritty scrape. But something in the back of my neck tensed. I looked across the table at Denise, my wife of 18 years. Her lips curled into this polite little smirk, the kind you give when a child says something awkward in public. Not an ounce of denial. No pushback. Not even a glance in my direction. She sipped her wine like we were at some tedious networking event, and I was the coat check guy who talked too much. I didn't say a word. Just finished slicing the steak, passed the plate to her, and listened to them banter about her boss's latest visionary move to restructure 2 entire departments over lunch. I knew exactly what that move was. I drafted the framework 7 months ago, anonymously. She mentioned his name 3 times during that dinner. Never once did mine come up. Afterwards, I did the dishes. Our son disappeared upstairs to his headset and screaming friends. Denise poured herself a second glass and took a call from marketing. She didn't whisper, didn't excuse herself. I heard the soft flirtation in her voice and the way she laughed at something he said. The same laugh she used to say for the back row of stand-up nights I dragged her to. When the house was finally quiet, I walked to my study, barefoot, lights off. I didn't bother turning anything on. Just opened the drawer by memory and slid out the black leather folio. Inside, nestled under old invoices and a postcard my son made in 3rd grade, was the only document that still made my hands sweat every time I touched it. Executive Oversight Agreement, Redline Holdings. My name wasn't handwritten. It was embedded, typeset, embossed. The title beneath it? Chairman Emeritus. It had taken 10 years to put the right people in the right rooms, fund the right shells, stay invisible while feeding the giant. Let Morris, the genius CEO everyone bowed to, take the credit. Let Denise climb through the ranks pretending the ladder wasn't handed to her by a man she now saw as staff. The silence was never surrender. It was scaffolding. I stared at that seal under the desk lamp, and something subtle but permanent clicked into place inside me. This wasn't about proving anything. Not to Denise. Not even to our son. This was about correction. The thing is, most people don't realize that the quiet ones, the ones who keep receipts, who don't flinch when dismissed, aren't weak. They're archivists. And archives? They don't forget. They wait. And before we go further, if you're still with me, take a second to hit subscribe. More than 90% of you listen without it. And it honestly helps our team keep sharing these stories that never make the headlines, but change everything behind closed doors. I closed the drawer, stood up, and walked out without taking the document. I didn't need it in my hand to act. I just needed to remember who I was before I let love dull the blade. Tomorrow, they'd learn. All of them. And it would start with a single sentence. Just 6 words. Trigger Clause 14. Silent to active transition. The message took 7 seconds to send. Just 7. Trigger Clause 14. Silent to active transition. I didn't even watch the screen to confirm delivery. I simply locked my phone, walked to the bar cart I hadn't touched in months, and poured 2 fingers of Oban. No ice. I held the glass for a moment, watching the amber swirl like a storm caught in a bottle. The smell alone brought back the last time I'd used that clause. A decade ago. Very different company. Very different woman in my bed. This time, I wouldn't be walking back from it. Across town, in a glass and steel high-rise that cost more to clean than most people's yearly salaries, a man named Morris sat in a temperature-controlled boardroom reviewing a Q4 deck someone else made, but he would present. His tie was immaculate. His shoes, Italian. His confidence? Untouchable. At least until the door burst open. "Sir, there's a summons," his assistant stammered, holding a printed envelope like it had bitten her. He didn't even look up. Then hand it to legal. That's what they're for. She didn't move. "Maya, you're not chairing it." Now he looked up. "What?" "The emergency board session. It's not under your name." He reached for the envelope and tore it open with an annoyed flick. His eyes skimmed the header and stopped cold on one line. Convened under Clause 14 authority, executive oversight. And just below it, chair, redacted for legal records. He read it twice before realizing the redacted line wasn't inked by a censor. It was printed that way by default. The actual identity wasn't redacted. It was legally sealed, hidden from everyone except one department, legal oversight, where the contract had been stored for over 10 years, untouched, unbothered. Morris blinked slowly. Who the hell triggered this? Maya whispered. It says it was initiated by a dormant equity class, a controlling silent shareholder. The blood drained from his face. He leaned back, lips parting slightly. "Get Denise," he muttered. Back in my home, I didn't bother refreshing my inbox. I knew what the memo said. I'd written its template during the original acquisition phase. Clause 14 wasn't dramatic. It didn't require fireworks or boardroom coups. It simply stated that in the event of a silent equity holder electing transition to active governance due to ethical discrepancies or systemic risk, control would default instantly, pending immediate compliance. No debates, no vetoes, just compliance. I knew Morris would call her. I knew Denise would panic. And I knew neither of them had ever read that clause. Denise always said she didn't bother with the fine print. And Morris? He thought old money meant inheriting a trust fund, not building a labyrinth of controlling interests while everyone was distracted by app launches and TED Talks. The truth is, I let them laugh. I let them restructure. I let Morris pose in front of backlit screens with buzzwords like synergy and exponential expansion. Hell, I even let Denise believe her rise through the ranks had nothing to do with pillow talk and the fact that her mentor kept forwarding glowing performance reviews I ghostwrote. Let them take the stage. I preferred the wiring behind the lights. And now, that wiring just short-circuited their entire illusion. By 9:12 p.m., Morris would be pacing a hallway. By 9:30, Denise would be calling legal. And by 9:40, both of them would receive the digital confirmation stamped from compliance. Chairman transition acknowledged. Oversight activation confirmed. I took a slow sip from the glass. Let the warmth spread. Across the room, my laptop chimed. One new file received. The board deck for tomorrow's emergency session. A courtesy, really. Morris still hadn't figured out that I had final editing privileges in the system. I opened it. Slide 2 featured a projection about the upcoming tech partnerships. The same partnership I vetoed, quietly, through a shell vote last quarter. The memo they missed wasn't buried. It wasn't encrypted. It was archived. And they missed it because they never looked beyond themselves. Let the meeting begin. The phone lit up at exactly 6:03 a.m. Denise was still tangled in the sheets beside me. Her hair a mess of black strands on the pillow, one arm draped lazily across my chest like everything was normal. Like the night before hadn't happened. Like she hadn't silently co-signed our son's insult and poured another glass of wine instead of dignity. The screen buzzed quietly. She stirred, barely opening her eyes before rolling over to check the caller ID. Morris, CEO. She blinked once, twice, then answered in that hushed, sleep-thickened voice I'd once found charming before I realized how many people heard it before me in the mornings. "Morris," she croaked, pulling the phone to her ear. His voice came through like a gunshot in a church. No usual bravado. No fake laughter. No smug executive calm. "I've been summoned," he said, fast. Breathless. "Emergency board session. Effective immediately." Denise sat up. "So? You're the chair. That's protocol when?" "No," Morris interrupted, voice cracking. "I'm not chairing it." She froze. "What do you mean you're not?" "There's a name on the summons." He paused, swallowed audibly. "It's your husband. It says he is the chairman." The silence between them could have split atoms. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. But I could feel her heartbeat accelerating through the sheets. Her breath shifted. Short, sharp inhales. That has to be a mistake," she whispered. "A typo. He's not part of the board." "There's no mistake, Denise," Morris said. "I called legal. They're freaking out. They say this was preloaded. It's part of the original compliance architecture, some clause, signed 10 years ago. He's the silent equity class. The dormant, controlling vote." She stood up, the phone pressed against her ear like it might start bleeding. No. That can't be right. I would have known. I would have seen." "No," Morris snapped, frustration mounting. "You didn't see. None of us did. You remember the senior compliance guy, Weaver? The one who retired to Belize?" She nodded, though Morris couldn't see it. "Yeah, he was ancient. He was your husband's guy. The clause was his design. I checked the file logs. It's been sitting in digital cold storage since the merger. No one noticed. Not even audit." Denise suddenly looked at me, her face pale, like she'd just realized the floor she'd been standing on was actually a trapdoor. "He never said anything," she murmured, almost to herself. "Of course he didn't," Morris hissed. "That's what silent governance is. But now it's not silent anymore." Clause 14 was triggered. "He's in. We're out." The call ended with no goodbye. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone dangling from her hand, her robe slipping off one shoulder. I didn't move, didn't say a word, just lay there, listening to her breathe like someone who'd been underwater too long. For years, she thought she was gaming the system, charming her way up, bypassing merit with favor and flash. She thought the company was her stage, her ascent, her arena. What she never once considered. The arena had an architect, and he designed it with exits only he could see. She stood up slowly, grabbed her phone again, and began dialing someone else, probably legal. Her hands were shaking now. All that smugness, all those networking dinners and late-night strategy sessions suddenly meant nothing. Because the man she thought was just support staff had built the goddamn foundation. And now he wasn't sitting quietly in the wings anymore. He was holding the spotlight. And every secret she'd whispered in the dark, it was about to be read under fluorescent boardroom lights. The elevator ride was silent except for the occasional ding of floors passing. No assistant greeted me this time. No one offered coffee, asked for my badge, or tried to explain where the boardroom was. The security team had already received the update from legal. Chairman presenting, full clearance. Even the building itself seemed confused by the shift in gravity. The receptionist, who'd once smiled just a little too warmly at Morris every morning, glanced up and visibly paled. I nodded politely. She stood halfway, as if trying to decide whether to speak or just vanish. She chose wisely. The double doors to the executive conference room were already open. Inside, polished table, crystal water glasses, fresh notepads no one would use. 11 directors. Only 3 looked familiar. Men I'd worked with back when this place was just a whiteboard and too much caffeine. The rest were newer, corporate climbers, tech brothers in tailored suits, and women whose LinkedIn profiles had more buzzwords than substance. They all stood as I entered. Some out of protocol, some out of uncertainty, a few out of instinct, like something old and sharp had just walked into the room and they weren't sure if it would cut. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the leather chair I hadn't sat in since this company went public, and laid a simple black binder on the table. On the cover, Chairman Oversight, Directive 01. I flipped it open, the pages whispering like confessionals. Page 1, bold, simple, unmissable. Corporate Ethics Review, initiated by Chairman. No one spoke. A few cleared throats. One director looked to Morris, seated halfway down the left side. Morris stared straight ahead, pale, jaw tight, his fingers tapping a rhythm that betrayed every ounce of panic he tried to conceal. I adjusted my glasses, looked around the room, and said, calm as a surgeon prepping the first incision. We'll begin with a full review of all appointments, promotions, and consulting roles that originated under Denise's department in the past 5 fiscal years. Someone shifted in their seat. A pen rolled off the table. No one moved to pick it up. I continued. That includes nepotistic hires, vendor kickbacks, and discretionary salary bumps. Another pause. I flipped the page. Second item, Morris's discretionary bonuses. Cross-reference with any contractual override mechanisms he's used since Q1 last year. I'll want those reviewed line by line. Finally, someone spoke. A woman in a navy suit I didn't recognize. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Are we conducting an internal audit? No, I said, without looking up. We're performing a vivisection. A few eyebrows rose. One man exhaled slowly through his nose. This company, I said, has drifted from its founding principles. Transparency, accountability, merit. I looked directly at Morris now. And in its drift, it's allowed vanity, favoritism, and unchecked ego to root themselves deep into its operations. Denise was not in the room. That was intentional. Clause 14 allowed me discretion to bar any executives under current ethics scrutiny from attending initial review sessions. She'd find out later. For now, I saw her fingerprints everywhere in the documents. Poorly structured advisory roles doled out to wine club friends. Fast-track promotions handed to co-workers who shared Pilates instructors. Internal memos with digital traces of her altering project timelines to match her weekend getaways. Morris's sins were more traditional. Inflated bonuses, off-the-books consulting arrangements, and a disturbing pattern of vendor contracts awarded to shell companies with obscured ownerships that, I suspected, would lead back to him. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't me making a scene. This was surgery, and I was done waiting for the tumor to shrink on its own. No one in the room smiled. No one questioned. Not because they were afraid, though they should have been, but because they realized something fundamental. They'd underestimated a man who'd built the stage they were performing on. Now I was back. And this time, I wasn't backstage. I was holding the script. And the red pen. She slammed the front door so hard the glass pane shivered. I didn't look up. I was sitting in the living room, lights off, reading through an old architectural digest I used to keep around for quiet weekends. Back when quiet weekends meant something other than watching my marriage rot in high-end silence. She didn't even take off her shoes. Just stomped straight across the hardwood like every plank had offended her. I heard the rustle of her coat hitting the floor, followed by the sharp, metallic clatter of her keys landing somewhere they didn't belong. "You blindsided me," she said. Her voice wasn't calm. It was cracked glass over boiling water. I turned a page in the magazine. "Good evening. Don't you dare play coy with me," she snapped, stepping into the room. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. Legal won't even take my calls. Morris won't answer texts. HR pulled me into some half-assed ethics meeting where they read out emails I sent to you in confidence." I folded the page down gently, looked up. Her makeup was smeared from hours of stress and what I imagined were frantic conversations behind closed doors. Her jacket was still hanging off one shoulder like she hadn't had time to decide whether to confront me or collapse in her car and scream. "You blindsided yourself," I said. "All I did was let gravity do its job." She crossed her arms. "This is retaliation. Don't pretend otherwise. You waited until the exact moment I built something of my own, and then you came in and—" "What?" I cut in, standing. "Corrected the narrative, reclaimed the truth, reminded you that borrowed power doesn't mean earned. You're jealous." That made me laugh. Not loud, just enough to let it echo between us. "You really think this is about envy?" I said, walking toward her. "Let me ask you something, Denise. When our son asked if I was just staff, did you laugh? Or did you just stay silent?" She blinked, hesitated. "I didn't think it." "No, that's right. You didn't think." I leaned closer. "You never think. Not past the surface. Not past the spotlight. Not past your latest little win. That's why you're panicking over a few emails while I'm holding shareholder rights you didn't know existed." Her eyes flashed. "You were nothing when I met you. You were fixing furniture in a co-op office in Denver. I built your confidence." I stepped back. "No, Denise. You witnessed it and mistook proximity for participation." She stormed past me then, toward the staircase, toward the wine fridge, maybe toward the last place in the house that hadn't betrayed her. But before she vanished from view, she spun on her heel. "This doesn't end well for you," she hissed. I shrugged. "Depends what you define as well. For me, it's truth. For you, it's applause." She was quiet for a second, then turned and disappeared upstairs. A minute later, the sound of closet doors opening, drawers slamming, things being flung into a bag. It wasn't the first time she'd threatened to leave, but it was the first time I didn't care. The balance in our marriage had always tilted. She flaunted and I watched. She climbed and I built the ladder behind her. She spoke and I listened, until she stopped speaking with me and started speaking about me. Now she was losing control, and the silence she once wielded as power was turning back on her. I sat back down, picked up the magazine again. The house creaked as she moved upstairs, her footsteps too angry to disguise. The truth is, I didn't blindside her. I just took the blindfold off. And nothing looks the same when the lights come on. He kicked his shoes off without looking up, dumped his backpack by the front door, and mumbled, "Hey." Teenagers always make greetings sound like chores. I glanced up from the kitchen, where I was chopping garlic like nothing seismic had just cracked through our lives. He stepped into the room, his brows tight, mouth flat. "Is Mom okay?" I wiped my hands on a towel, leaned back against the counter. "Why?" She was crying. "In her car. Parked around the corner." I nodded slowly. "She'll be fine." He paused. "Did something happen at her job?" I gave him a look. Just one of those measured, long looks that says, "What do you think?" He shifted his weight. "She said someone, some higher up, is doing a corporate review or something. That it's political. That it's not her fault." I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind you give someone who just walked in halfway through a chess game and started laughing at your pawn. "She's not wrong," I said. "It's not just her fault." He blinked. "Wait, are you saying you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I said, "Come with me." He hesitated, like I'd just asked him to help mulch the lawn, but followed anyway. We walked past the hallway he used to race down in Batman pajamas, past the room where he built Lego cities while Denise and I argued in whispers, to the garage. It wasn't the kind of garage you see in magazines. There were tools, a water heater, some gym equipment collecting dust. But in the far corner, behind a rolling shelf, was a steel safe bolted to the floor. Not massive, but dense. The kind of thing that doesn't get moved, just open with reverence. I punched in the code. The lock clicked. Inside were no guns, no cash bricks, just a few leather-bound folders, some framed photographs, and a stack of certificates, all bearing the same seal. Redline Holdings, Class A equity stakeholder. He looked at the first certificate, puzzled, then picked up a photo. Me, sitting at a boardroom table, 2 seats down from a man with a name he recognized from financial news. Another photo. Me again. Older suit. Different room. Same expression. The one he never seemed to notice when I sat across from him at dinner. Composed, calculating, quiet. "What is this?" he asked. I rested my hand on his shoulder. "This," I said, "is what staff owns when they stop talking and start building." He didn't say anything. His eyes flicked between the documents and the pictures. Then he whispered, "But you never said." I didn't need to. He looked at me. "But why let her treat you like that? Why not tell me? Or her?" I closed the safe gently. "Because people only hear what they respect. And your mom respected volume. Flash. Titles." He chewed his lip. "And you?" "I respect leverage." The silence stretched, thick and new. He ran his fingers over the edge of a folder. "So, you're really her boss?" I chuckled. In more ways than one. He didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He just nodded, slow, thoughtful. For the first time in years, his expression shifted from the cocky disinterest of adolescence to something heavier. Something almost like shame. He whispered, "I didn't know." "I know." A pause. Then he asked, "Is that why she's crying?" I looked at him. "She's crying because she finally realized what I was carving while she was climbing. And because she taught you to mock it." He nodded again. Not defensive. Not angry. Just quiet. And finally, he looked at me the way he used to look at her. Like someone worth understanding. I didn't need his apology. I just needed his recognition. And in that cold garage, surrounded by metal and paper and legacy, I finally had it. By Wednesday morning, the office was no longer hers. Not officially. Her badge still worked. Her nameplate still clung stubbornly to the glass office wall. But the feeling of ownership, of dominance, of power in the air, gone. Evaporated like cheap perfume under fluorescent lights. The first alert came from HR. 3 names, Midwest VP, Talent Acquisitions Head, and the Director of Compliance, had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending formal review. Computers locked. Phones collected. Escort to the elevator style. By noon, whispers had turned into full-throated speculation. Slack channels froze. One assistant in legal dropped her entire lunch in the courtyard when she saw Morris leaving the building with a white envelope in his hand and a look that could strip paint. But the real detonation came at 2:14 p.m. That's when the internal memo hit every inbox from the C-suite down to the third-floor copywriters. In accordance with executive oversight, the following personnel changes are effective immediately. Denise's name wasn't at the top. That would have made it easier. She was 4th, tucked just below the mid-level removals, as if her fall needed to be disguised in humility before it could be felt in full. Denise Langford, reassigned to interim advisory role pending investigation into preferential advancement and ethics violations. It didn't say demotion. It didn't have to. The inbox exploded. So did the whispers. Meetings were canceled. Calendar invites vanished in real time. Even the receptionist stopped offering her coffee. The emails were what sealed it. They surfaced fast. Leaked, or, more accurately, released, from within the compliance archives as part of the ethics sweep. Names were redacted. Hers wasn't. Lines like, "He plays CEO in his study while I actually run this company." Hiring freeze. Please. I am the exception. He calls it a sabbatical. I call it pretending. Cute hobby, though. The shareholders weren't just upset. They were incensed. Not because of the insults. Not even the arrogance. But because buried in those emails were references to actual decisions, policy overrides, contract approvals, preferential treatment of vendors, and internal hires, all tied to her name. All unsigned, but traceable. The board had no choice. The ethics panel, normally a sleepy quarterly obligation with catered muffins, was now the epicenter of a Category 5 career storm. I didn't need to attend it. I had the transcripts. I didn't smile as I read them. I didn't gloat. I just underlined one phrase on page 3. The subject failed to disclose her personal connection to the original silent stakeholder. She never even admitted I was part of the machine, let alone the one who built it. Now, that omission wasn't just personal. It was legal. She tried calling me 3 times that afternoon. No voicemail. Just a red badge of desperation on my screen. I didn't pick up. I didn't text back. There was nothing to say. She was used to spinning stories, pulling strings, getting ahead by being likable. But in a crisis, charm burns fast and leaves nothing but ash. And in this storm, she wasn't the rescuer. She was the casualty. By the time she walked out of the building at 4:07 p.m., the shift was visible. Her steps were faster. Her shoulders hunched. Her blouse, once crisp, clung like armor losing shape. People watched her pass like a relic being retired. No applause. No questions. Just the quiet acknowledgement that someone who once believed they were untouchable had just discovered gravity. She came home late. Didn't speak. Didn't make eye contact. Just poured a drink, sat at the edge of the couch, and stared at nothing. The ice clinked in her glass like a countdown. I walked past her on my way to the study. She didn't look up. But as I reached the door, she finally spoke. "They're saying I used you." I stopped, glanced over my shoulder. "No," I said. "They're saying you forgot me. And forgetting power is the fastest way to lose it." The restaurant wasn't flashy. No exposed Edison bulbs. No dry ice cocktails with names like Synergy Smoke. Just old wood, real linens, and a maitre d' who didn't bother asking if we had a reservation. He knew who the table was for. The director was already seated. Winston Hartford, 8 years my senior. Sat on the board since the company was a pitch deck and a promise. Always cordial, always polite, but never quite saw me as anything more than a founder's husband with good tailoring and bad timing. Tonight, his posture was different. He stood when I approached, shook my hand like it weighed more than it did. "I'm glad you agreed to this," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I was curious," I replied, sitting. Menus were unnecessary. We both knew what we'd order. Steak, neat scotch, silence broken only by precision. He waited until the waiter disappeared before speaking. "You played the long game," he said, almost admiringly. I didn't see it. I don't think any of us did. I took a sip of water. "I played the quiet game." Winston smiled, leaning back. "That's the thing, isn't it? Everyone's so busy shouting their value. They forget power doesn't always make noise." I said nothing. "You always came across as, I don't know, supporting cast." Denise was loud, ambitious. Morris was magnetic. "You were just." "Still," I offered. "Yes." He nodded, slowly. "Still." And I mistook that for passive. "You weren't the only one." I unfolded my napkin, draped it across my lap. The company's culture rewarded volume. They assumed I wasn't in the room if I wasn't speaking. But rooms aren't owned by the noisiest voice. "No," he said, raising his glass slightly. "They're owned by the one who built them." I let that sit a moment, then raised mine in return. "You measured me by noise," I said. "I deal in weight." He clinked his glass gently to mine. "We underestimated you." "You didn't underestimate me," I said. "You overestimated your own immunity." The food arrived. Rare steak, grilled asparagus, charred bread still steaming in its basket. The kind of meal that doesn't apologize for being what it is. Winston cut a piece of steak, chewed slowly, then asked, "What's next?" I dabbed my mouth. "We finished the audit. Reinstate internal ethics checks. Reinforce long-term strategies that don't rely on charm or chaos." He smirked. "Cold. Efficient." I tilted my head. "Functional." He studied me for a moment. "You never wanted the spotlight, did you?" "No," I said. "But I wanted to make sure whoever was in it wasn't casting shadows they didn't earn." He nodded. "And Denise?" "She's an echo now." The room got too quiet, and she had nothing left to say. The rest of dinner passed in clean, easy conversation, nothing forced, nothing performed. Just two men who understood that survival at the top doesn't come from noise, or flash, or LinkedIn quotes about leadership. It comes from leverage, from listening, from knowing that power rarely needs to announce itself. When we stood to leave, Winston offered one last glance. Not deference, but respect. The kind given not to a rival, but to a reminder. Because now, every conversation that once excluded me would whisper with caution. Every boardroom that once saw me as Denise's husband would double-check the name on the chair. And every word spoken behind my back would land with the knowledge that I don't just listen. I record. I wait. And I move when it matters. She rang the doorbell like she didn't live here anymore. 3 short chimes. Hesitation. Then one more. Quieter. I didn't answer immediately. Let her stand there for a minute, maybe 2. Long enough to remember the 100 times I waited for her to come home from some late-night strategy session, wondering if I should text, call, or just pretend I hadn't noticed the time. When I finally opened the door, she looked human, smaller. Her hair was damp from the rain. No makeup, no statement necklace, no crisp blouse engineered to impress boardrooms. Just a plain gray hoodie I hadn't seen in years, and those old sneakers she used to keep in the trunk for emergencies. Funny. Now she was the emergency. Her eyes flicked past me into the house, like she expected a lawyer, or maybe a camera. Some final act of vengeance waiting just behind me. There wasn't. She stepped inside without speaking. Dripping water onto the floor she used to insist was too delicate for shoes. I shut the door. Waited. She turned toward me, her voice barely above a whisper. You planned this. It wasn't a question. It was a sentence she'd been holding in for days, maybe weeks. I looked at her evenly. No, I prepared for it. That's different. She gave a hollow laugh. Is that supposed to make this feel less personal? It's not about feelings, Denise. It's about truth. You don't trip into power. You build toward it. Quietly, brick by brick, while everyone else's backs are turned. She shook her head slowly. We were a family. Families, I said, don't scoff. They stand. They don't shrink each other to feel taller. They don't let their son believe silence is weakness. Her eyes filled fast. She blinked hard, but one tear slipped down, trailing across her cheek like it had no business being there. I didn't know how far you'd go, she whispered. I met her gaze. I didn't go far. I just stood up. She winced, visibly, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She sat down at the edge of the couch like it still belonged to her, fingers twitching in her lap, searching for a rhythm that might make sense of any of this. I lost everything, she said. No, I replied. You lost access. She looked at me then, really looked, like she hadn't in years, like she was searching for the version of me she remembered, docile, supportive, always half a step behind her. But he wasn't here. He never really was. I didn't know who you were, she murmured. I nodded. Because you never looked past what I wasn't. We sat in silence. Not the sharp kind, not the bitter kind. Just stillness. Like two people in the final frame of a movie neither of them liked, but both agreed to sit through anyway. Can we come back from this? She asked eventually, voice cracking. I tilted my head. Why would you want to come back to something you never respected? She had no answer. Just more tears. The quiet, desperate kind. The kind that aren't about heartbreak, but about realization. That she'd mistaken quiet for weak. That she'd confused humility with irrelevance. That she'd spent a decade building a tower of applause, only to discover it stood on ground someone else owned. She stood up slowly, unsure if she should hug me or apologize or just disappear. I didn't move, didn't offer closure, because this wasn't my wound. It was hers. At the door, she turned once more. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No, but I don't need to carry you anymore. And then I closed the door behind her, softly, because sometimes the cleanest revenge isn't destruction. It's the silence that follows when the illusion finally collapses. The boardroom was colder than usual, literally and metaphorically. It wasn't the HVAC. It was the air of finality. That sterile quiet before a verdict is read, when everyone in the room already knows but needs to hear it said out loud to make it real. The table gleamed under recessed lights. Notebooks sat unopened. Water glasses untouched. No one dared touch their phone. I entered through the main door, not the side entrance reserved for guests. Not anymore. This time, I walked in with two people behind me. Head of legal on my left, CFO on my right. Both of them carried nothing but tablets. No binders. No fanfare. Because the days of distracting people with paper were over. I took my seat at the head of the table. Didn't look left or right. Just opened the company-issued folder before me and read the top line of the prepared statement. The ethics audit is complete. A new culture begins today. No reaction. No applause. Just breathing. I let the silence hang. Let the gravity of it spread, settle, constrict. Everyone in that room had ridden the coattails of noise, of visibility, of ladder climbing. But now they were sitting across from something heavier. Something older. Designed. I flipped to the second page. Skimmed it, though I already knew every word. Then, looking up, I added, for those wondering, no? I didn't rise. I looked at each of them. Slowly. Deliberately. I just stopped sitting. It hit harder than any gavel. Not because it was clever, but because it was true. Across the table, Denise sat in the second seat to the right. Still technically advisory, still attending per policy. But her eyes told the story. She wasn't present. She was witnessing. Her arms were folded. Her jaw locked. But there was no defiance left. Just the quiet discomfort of someone realizing that every story she'd ever told about who held power was fiction. And across the room, sitting behind the board, laptop open, head slightly tilted like he was trying to solve a puzzle he should have known by heart, sat our son. Intern badge clipped awkwardly to his blazer. The same tie I gave him for his first debate tournament. He wasn't looking at his notes. He was looking at me. Really looking. I nodded just once. He nodded back, because he understood now. That leadership isn't the loudest voice in the room. It's the one that never needed to raise it in the first place. The meeting continued. Bullet points were reviewed. Budgets approved. But no one interrupted. No one challenged. The atmosphere had changed. Not because a new man had taken charge, but because the man who'd always been there had revealed himself. When it ended, they filed out quietly. A few nodded. A few avoided eye contact. But none of them laughed. Denise lingered behind. She didn't speak, just gathered her notes and left without a sound. Our son stayed until I stood up, closed his laptop, walked beside me, said nothing. But as we stepped into the elevator, he muttered, just loud enough to hear, "They'll never call you staff again." I smiled. "Doesn't matter if they do." He frowned. "Why?" I looked at him, then straight ahead as the doors closed. "Because I never needed the title," I said. Just the truth.